A 3-0 loss to the Bruins, which included an empty netter, probably doesn't sound too bad if you're the Winnipeg Jets. Winnipeg looked like it played a relatively even game, actually outshot the Bruins by a pretty decent margin, and you might say, well, they skated with the best team in the NHL and one of the best teams in history. I would say there is certainly merit to that, but there are some bigger problems for the Jets as they try and lock down a wild card spot. We'll dive into all of that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and happy Friday on this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Megaphone, Odyssey, and YouTube. Doing so is completely free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode, but most of all, we just really love and appreciate your support. Now, like I said on tonight's episode, we're going to be diving into Winnipeg versus Boston and also talking about Winnipeg's upcoming really pivotal match against the Nashville Predators. But first, let's start off with Winnipeg versus the Bruins, a game in which you'd look at the stats and you'd say the Jets weren't actually so bad. In fact, if you're somebody who's probably more on the glass half full side, you'd say there is reason to be optimistic. So we'll start off with the good, right? We always like talking about the things that the Jets do well. I would say for Winnipeg, they generally kept up with the Bruins. I felt like, when it came down to like the penalty kill and stuff, the Jets PK did a pretty good job of frustrating Boston's setup, kept them off balance. And at times, at even strength, the Jets were outskating and outworking the Bruins. I think that there was certainly a push at times for Winnipeg to really try and find, some good scoring opportunities. A couple of the players looked a little bit more active. I think Kyle Connor had a better game than the last one, though, the last game was so bad that, anything he did in this game would probably be an improvement. But I thought that he got into some good shooting positions, thought that he had a couple of really good scoring opportunities. Same with Mark Scheifele. I think both were a little bit unlucky not to score, especially Scheifele. I mean, Scheifele had at one point an empty net and just could not shovel it home before like a random stick came across and poked his chance away. So, yeah, I think that there was reason to be a little bit more optimistic about this loss compared to some of the other ones the Jets have endured recently. It wasn't for lack of trying. I think, if anything, it's just that the Bruins defensively are super resilient. That Boston team, even when they're not playing at their very best, which I think for part of this game we certainly saw that, they're still a very tough out. I mean, this is a team that has hit 50 wins for the at the fastest rate we've ever seen in the league. So obviously, this Bruins team is very special. We haven't really seen anything quite like them in the modern NHL recently. So, yeah, if you can give them a run for their money, you're probably not doing half bad. And I think that is one potential takeaway you could have from this game. The Jets not doing so badly. I think the other thing that I would be relatively pleased with was that Hellebuyck, for the most part, looked pretty good. Again, after a couple of really big games in Florida, he didn't end up playing the Canes game, but I would imagine he'd probably have had a fine game that one as well. It wasn't like, the Canes were getting into the most dangerous shooting areas, but I feel like Helly probably would have saved a couple of extra goals and given the Jets at least a little bit more of a chance to try and win that one. But, for the Bruins game, I thought it was good. I liked some of the depth players as well. I thought that they did a decent job of creating space, occasionally winning some battles. Morgan Barron continues to be looking pretty solid for Winnipeg. I like Barron a lot. I think that there is upside with him. I thought Gustafsson also looked pretty solid. I think these guys really at some point should get a higher look in the roster and certainly in the lineup, but we may not see that this year, especially with how Bones likes to run his lines. He definitely has a very clear vision of the top six and the bottom six, which I think at some point it would be nice to get away from that. I think the Jets really should be more focused on running three really good balanced scoring lines, and then an occasional defensive line that can eat up and soak up some of those like more rigorous minutes, wear down the opposition, and all of that to set up your other three scoring lines. But that isn't going to be the case for the season. So I guess overall from this game, this wasn't like a loss in which you'd sit there and you'd say Winnipeg was embarrassed or run out of town. I think that would be a happy moment for Jets fans. The Bruins, Winnipeg has gotten close to beating in the past couple of games. I think their best chance came on the road, of all things, earlier this season when Winnipeg just fell on the very last moment. Was it Pasternak, I think, who had the game winner? I don't recall, but it was like, a 3-2 loss. Very, very close game. And the Jets, I think that they had a really solid outing and effort on that one. That was like a full team push for the victory. This one, I suppose the Jets were a little bit unfortunate. Winnipeg certainly peppered the net with a lot of different, deflections, a couple of good close-in chances, some nice shots from the face-off circles. So, yeah, I think that there was some reason to be optimistic. They certainly kept the Bruins on their toes. I think Boston would probably say that, they were pushed a little bit more than they might have been expecting, especially for a Jets team that is kind of on the injured side. I mean, Morrissey came back in this game, didn't really look right. We're still missing Perfetti and Dubois, two of our more important contributors in the top six. So all told, it wasn't a bad game. I think that is a fair assessment. And I think that there is, some reason to be optimistic if and when the Jets finally start getting healthy and getting back to full strength, and we can start to see some of our most important contributors coming back into the lineup. Now, I did say that there were some points of concern, especially on the offensive side of things. And in just a moment, we'll dive into why, I'm kind of right now a little bit in the glass half empty mode, just because, I'm thinking about the future. And honestly, we don't know what shape Perfetti and Dubois and some of the other guys are going to be coming back to when they're finally back in the lineup. But before we dive into maybe some of the less fun parts of this game, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money lines to point scorers to the number of threes drained. Maybe you want to predict where LeBron James is going to finish his milestone season with his career record at the end of this year. Maybe you want to cast a bet on the number of threes that Steph Curry is going to drain, even as he starts to enter the twilight of his career. No matter what you want to bet on, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Don't miss this chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Again, that is FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us again. We're just kind of diving into Winnipeg versus the Boston Bruins. And, we talked about what I would say is encouraging from this game, right? The Jets didn't get outplayed by a massive margin. They skated with the best team in the NHL and really one of the best teams in the league's history by a fair degree. It was a pretty close game in a lot of respects. But I also said that there were some maybe warning signs that we've kind of been seeing with this team for, I would say, the past few months. And one of the biggest ones that I've really struggled with this team is offensive creation. I would say in the first half of the season, Bones had, the lines rolling, and the Jets were activating more aggressively, especially with the blue liners offering a lot more offensive support, dropping below the goal line, and generally offering more outlets and helping to create pressure which ultimately allowed the Jets to penetrate opposing slots a lot more frequently. We saw Winnipeg sort of crashing the net, getting down low, and really driving towards the paint, which is important because that's where you're more likely to get greasy rebounds, take advantage of second chance opportunities, and also have really good high danger cross slot chances. Also, it's just a lot harder for a goaltender when you're in their face and they can't track the puck effectively in a massive bodies. I think with how the Jets are constructed, that's actually a lot more beneficial because let's be real, Winnipeg has like a very clear divide, like I said, top six, bottom six, and the bottom six does not score a lot. So you need to have your top shooters in really prime positions in dangerous areas as often as you possibly can. And if you're not going to generate a ton of those chances, then make them as dangerous as you can when they count. So yeah, I think in this respect, Boston, especially for the first, like I would say, 20 minutes or so, didn't really play all that aggressively. In fact, they looked, to me, sluggish and kind of sloppy, which um, it's not great, right? But I think for Boston, what they'll sort of hang their hat on is that when it came to slot defense, that's where Winnipeg basically couldn't get anything going. Once Boston skaters kind of dropped between the faceoff circles, arranged themselves into a really good defensive holding pattern, Winnipeg just sort of ran out of ideas. The Jets tried to go towards tip deflections, point shots, stuff off the backboards. They tried a number of different things, and occasionally we did see them get off a couple of really good chances. I think Scheifele's empty net opportunity was probably the best of the game for the Jets. Kyle Connor had a couple of good opportunities. Schmidt hit one off, I think, the crossbar or something. So it wasn't like the Jets weren't creating at all. I think that would be disingenuous to say anything like that. But what I will say is, compared to what we saw at the start of the season, the Jets have struggled a lot more now. And that's partially because Perfetti and Dubois are out. I mean, there's no mistaking, especially when it comes to Dubois, how important he is to crashing the net, getting in close, and really muscling his way between defenders to create those high danger chances. So I think we're seeing his lack of presence really impacting that part of Winnipeg's game. But I also think the Jets have just, kind of looked slow recently. Winnipeg is not a fast team by design, but we also know that when the Jets are sort of scuffling along and players aren't really feeling it, this team can start to drag even more than usual. One thing I've noticed is that to me, Scheifele looks a little slower than like what I would normally expect from him. I know that his game has never really been predicated around speed, but it feels like he's nursing something. I don't know. It could just be my imagination, but he doesn't seem like he's as close to 100% as you'd hope. Kyle Connor definitely has to be frustrated right now as well. I think with Connor, it's probably more on the psychological side. He's peppering the net with tons of shots. I think for KFC, the thing with him is that he's actually handling the puck a little too much. That sounds really funny and maybe sort of counterintuitive, but I think with KFC, he's like an elite poacher and certainly one of the best one-on-one matchup players. But if he's the one having to carry the puck around the offensive zone a lot, I think it's a lot harder for him because he's trying to pick his angles, he's trying to create that space, and KFC is just best when he's the elite receiver who can sort of one-time it and get into those really dangerous positions, being there maybe on the backside or filtering in between defenders without them being aware on the face-off circles. If he has to be the one drawing that attention initially, I think it makes his job a lot harder and it makes him less effective because he takes a lot more time to shoot. The keeper is watching him a lot more closely, and so he doesn't have that much of an element of surprise by the time he's ready to take his shot. It's kind of similar to the problem with running everything through him on the power play. Goalies know what to expect. They're already tracking him. They're already in a better pre-shot position to stop him. So if Winnipeg can find a way to open up Kyle Moore and ask him to carry the puck a little bit less, I think you'll start to see him find those scoring lanes a little bit easier. But yeah, overall, I think my biggest concern with this team, without a couple of all-star weapons, is looking at that low slot creation. If they can figure out how to break that down again, especially as we get towards the playoffs, I think a lot of my concerns about this team in the postseason will start to go away. I think that'll be the biggest challenge for them, and it'll make things a lot better if they can solve it. But it's also a problem where they might not be able to fix it this year, and maybe not even in the offseason. But we'll see. I mean, they've certainly had chances, earlier this year that they were a lot more clinical with. So maybe a little bit of a return to health. We'll see the Jets unlock that potential again. But I'd be curious to know what you think of this game. Drop your thoughts on Winnipeg versus Boston in the comments below, or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a little bit, though, I do want to preview Winnipeg's upcoming game against the Predators. This is probably the biggest game of the season. It could decide which of these two teams eventually goes on to the second wildcard spot. And, it is essentially a 4-point swing. So stay tuned as we dive into Winnipeg versus Nashville in just a moment. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We are just wrapping up really quickly tonight with some thoughts ahead of Winnipeg versus Nashville. This is a game that curiously has massive implications, maybe one of the biggest games of the season for the Jets. I can't believe I'm saying this because the Preds are not even in a playoff spot, but they're putting serious pressure on Winnipeg to perform. Same with the Calgary Flames, although I think for me, I don't trust the Flames as much to be as big of a threat as I think the Preds are. Just because Nashville has games in hand, and every time you have that, that is always a problem. Now the Jets did get a bit of a break this evening as Chicago ended up outlasting Nashville 2-1, so that is huge for the Jets. But tomorrow's game in Nashville, massive playoff implications. The Jets really have to win this one. Splitting, this Eastern Conference swing, it's not the worst outcome. I mean, I was expecting maybe 2 to 3 points in 4 games because of how good their opponents were. So 4 points is not terrible, especially if you kind of look at it glass half full, that the Jets kind of skated evenly-ish with the Boston Bruins. Now, the Bruins still outplayed them, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't to the degree where you'd be really upset with the result. Now, Winnipeg and Nashville is going to have to be Winnipeg's strongest effort so far because, look, the Preds might not be all that deep and they might have some of the same issues the Jets do, but Jussi Saros in net has been a huge problem for a lot of teams. And, this Preds team sold a number of their star talents, but they've still got guys like Josi, Forsberg, and several others that I think are going to make, a lot of headaches for the Jets. So Winnipeg really needs to come away with the victory. I don't think they can really settle for just 1 point. You really have to put Nashville as far back as you humanly can, especially because the second wildcard spot is a little bit on the tenuous side. The Jets are really clinging to life here and trying to fend off a Preds push. And, the Nashville Predators recently have been a little bit more resurgent than I'd like. They've had a couple of win streaks. They've looked a little stronger than, they did a couple of months ago. So for Winnipeg, this is really important to not lose sight of that. They're like 6-3-1 in their last 10 games. And look, no one's going to look at this Preds team and think that they're a powerhouse, but they're only 4 points behind the Jets with 3 games in hand. So for Winnipeg, this is, again, I think the most important game of the season so far. Nashville, not an easy customer, especially on the road. Bridgestone will probably be pumping a little bit, and the Jets have a very tall task to try and fend these teams off. I think Winnipeg's dream of finishing in the top 3 Central is probably dead at this point. I don't think the Jets are really going to be able to catch up to Dallas, Minnesota, or Colorado, not unless something really changes with this team. But they're already like 5 points behind the Avs, and the Avs actually have 2 games in hand. So we can probably kiss those dreams goodbye. We can certainly kiss the Central Division title goodbye, but I don't even care about winning the Central at this point. Just trying to make the postseason is the biggest objective. And to do that, you really have to take care of business against Nashville. Like I said, the Preds, not exactly the deepest team right now, but Duchesne, Forsberg, Josi, and curiously, Tommy Novak. I don't even know who Novak is, or at least until recently, he's had a pretty monster season, shooting like 20% He's almost a point per game, which is crazy. But this team is one of those squads that I think is deceptively shallow. You look at their top six scoring and then the bottom six scoring, and there's a pretty clear divide. But the Jets just really can't take that for granted. They cannot get sloppy. They need to avoid going on the PK as much as humanly possible. I think if you give Nashville too many odd man situations, that's going to be a problem. So hopefully Winnipeg can clean things up. I don't even care how they win on Saturday, just that they do, and preferably in regulation. If they give the Preds a point, you just make sure that you get the extra one, but please, please, please win in regulation. I'm going to predict this one to be a 3-1 Jets win, so let me know what you think in the comments below. Drop either in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Drop your predictions there. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen today. Make your second listen Game to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, and every result with Locked On Game to Game. You'll get that across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I'm your host, Harrison Lee. We will see you later next week. But for tonight, thanks for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.